Deputy Dale Bradock snatched the envelope out of Marcus Williams's hand, without blinking, counted $500 in cash, slow and deliberate, right in front of the man's face, then stuffed every single bill into his own pocket. He smiled. That smile had worked for 10 years. But tonight something was different. Because what Bradock didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that a tiny lens mounted behind Marcus's rearview mirror had captured every second of it. Every word, every threat, every stolen dollar. If you're watching this from Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The night Marcus Williams got pulled over, he wasn't thinking about justice. He wasn't thinking about fighting a corrupt system or becoming the man who finally brought down a decorated sheriff's deputy with 10 years on the force. He was thinking about Ethan. Specifically, he was thinking about the look on his 10-year-old son's face when he opened that birthday gift. A brand new baseball glove, the kind with the deep pocket and the real leather stitching, the kind Marcus himself had wanted as a boy and never got. He'd saved for it over 3 months. Small amounts here and there scraped together between rent and groceries and the electric bill that always seemed to arrive at exactly the wrong time. $500 cash, sealed in a plain white envelope in the glove compartment. $500 that represented something much bigger than money. It was a promise Marcus had made to his wife Janet in the final weeks of her life, sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, listening to the machines breathe for her. "Promise me," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me that boy grows up knowing his father never quit." "I promise," Marcus had said, and he meant it with everything he had. That was 4 years ago. Now Marcus was 38 years old, raising Ethan alone, working double shifts at the warehouse 3 nights a week, coaching his son's little league team on Saturdays, making lunches at 6 in the morning, and checking homework at 11 at night. He was tired in the bone-deep way that only single parents understand, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fully fix. But he was there. Every day, every morning, every game, every nightmare, every fever. He was there. And that night on Route 9, heading back from his mother's house in the next county, with that envelope sitting in the glove compartment and a half-eaten bag of chips on the passenger seat, Marcus felt something rare for him. He felt okay. Not happy exactly. Not the way he used to feel when Janet was alive, and the 3 of them piled onto the couch on Friday nights, watching movies with Ethan falling asleep between them. But okay. The quiet kind of okay that comes when you've done your best, and the day is almost over. Then the blue lights came on behind him. Marcus felt it in his chest before he even looked in the rearview mirror. That specific tightening, that specific weight. Every black man in America knows that feeling. It doesn't matter who you are, doctor, teacher, mechanic, single father. Driving home on a Tuesday night, when those lights appear behind you on an empty road, your body reacts before your mind does. Your hands get careful. Your breathing changes. Your eyes go to the mirror and you start running through the checklist automatically. What did I do? Was I speeding? Is the registration current? Are the tags visible? Where are my hands? Marcus checked his speed. He was doing 53 in a 55. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a light. There were no lights for 6 miles in either direction. His registration was current. He knew it was current because he'd renewed it 2 weeks earlier, and the reminder was still on his kitchen counter. His seatbelt was on. His headlights were on. His phone was in his cup holder, not in his hand. He had done nothing wrong. And yet, the lights were there. And yet the weight was there. And yet his hands were already moving to the 10 and 2 position before the patrol car had even fully pulled in behind him. He eased off the gas and pulled to the shoulder of the road. He turned off the engine. He put both hands on the steering wheel, where anyone approaching from outside could see them clearly. And he waited. He had heard stories about this stretch of road. Not rumors, stories. The kind passed between men at the barbershop, at church, over backyard fences. The kind that get told quietly, with pauses, with the teller looking over their shoulder, the way people do when they're describing something they've seen but can't fully prove. There's a deputy on Route 9. Bradock. Big guy, gray hair, now been on the force a long time. Pulls over brothers coming through the county. Finds excuses. Says he smells something. searches the car, and if you've got cash on you, it disappears. Cash money gone. And when you complain, nothing happens. Nothing. The supervisor files it, the system eats it, and Bradock keeps showing up to work the next morning. Marcus had heard that story at least 3 different times from 3 different people. He'd heard about a man named Robert Caulfield who lost $800 on this same road back in 2018. Money he was bringing to his sister for a medical bill. Caulfield had filed a complaint. The complaint was reviewed internally. The deputy was cleared. Case closed. He'd heard about a woman named Denise Patterson, schoolteacher, gray-haired, never had so much as a parking ticket, who lost $400 that she'd planned to use for her granddaughter's school supplies. Denise had tried to get a lawyer. The lawyer told her it wasn't worth pursuing. Civil asset forfeiture, the lawyer had said. Like that phrase was supposed to explain why a decorated officer of the law could reach into a grandmother's purse and take her money and call it legal. Marcus had heard those stories. And sitting there on the shoulder of Route 9, watching the silhouette of a large man step out of the patrol car in his side mirror. Marcus wasn't thinking, this isn't happening to me. He was thinking with a cold clarity that surprised even him, I need to be ready. That was why the camera was there. Not because Marcus had been planning this moment. Not because he was looking for a confrontation, or wanted to be an activist, or had any interest whatsoever in becoming a symbol of anything. He was a warehouse worker and a little league coach and a single father who was just trying to get home. But 3 months earlier, after hearing Robert Caulfield tell his story at a cookout, watching the defeat in the man's eyes, watching how he paused every few sentences and shook his head slowly, like he still couldn't fully believe it had happened, Marcus had driven straight to an electronics store and bought a dash cam. A small one. A good one. The kind that records continuously, stores the footage on a loop, and uploads a backup to the cloud automatically. He hadn't told anyone he'd installed it. Not his mother, not his coworkers, not even Ethan. He'd mounted it behind the rearview mirror where it was barely visible, aimed it to capture the entire interior of the front cabin, as well as the view through the windshield, and he'd checked the connection twice. Then he'd driven home and tried to forget it was there. For 3 months, it had recorded nothing but uneventful commutes, school pickups, and drive-through windows. Tonight, the red light in the corner of the device was glowing steadily. It was recording. The knock on the window was hard. Too hard, the kind of knock that isn't asking permission, that's already decided how the next 5 minutes are going to go. Marcus kept his hands on the wheel and turned his head slowly. Deputy Dale Bradock was standing at the driver's side window. 6'2", maybe 6'3", built the way men get when they've worked physical jobs their whole lives and then settled into authority. His hair was gray at the temples, and his face was the kind of weathered that comes from years of outdoor work and not enough sleep. He wore his uniform like armor, pressed pristine, every pin in place. He was holding a flashlight, and he was shining it directly into Marcus's face. "License and registration," Bradock said. "Not good evening. Not do you know why I stopped you. Not even the standard procedural courtesy that any traffic stop is supposed to begin with. Just license and registration." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I'm going to reach into my back pocket for my wallet, and then into the glove compartment for my registration. My hands are on the wheel." Bradock didn't respond. He just kept the light in Marcus's face. Marcus retrieved his wallet first, slowly, deliberately, every movement telegraphed in advance, the way he'd learned to do, the way his own father had taught him at 16 years old. Move slow, announce everything, keep your hands visible. He pulled out his license and held it out the window. Bradock took it without looking at it. "Registration," he said. "I need to open the glove compartment," Marcus said. "Go ahead." Marcus opened it slowly. The envelope was right there, right on top, white and plain and obvious. He felt Bradock's flashlight move from his face to the glove compartment the moment the door swung open. Marcus reached past the envelope, retrieved the registration slip, and held it out the window. Bradock took it, looked at it, looked at the license, looked at Marcus. "Where are you coming from tonight?" he said. "My mother's house," Marcus said. "Over in Haverfield." "Haverfield." Bradock repeated the word like he was skeptical of it. "What were you doing in Haverfield?" "Visiting my mother," Marcus said. How long were you there? Marcus kept his voice even. About 3 hours. And where are you going now? Home. Where's home? Millbrook, Marcus said. 42 Clover Street. Bradock looked at him for a long moment. That's a long drive. It's about 40 minutes, Marcus said. I make it pretty regularly. Bradock looked back at the license. Then he looked at Marcus again, and Marcus could physically feel the way you feel a change in temperature the moment the deputy made a decision. Step out of the vehicle, Bradock said. Marcus didn't move. Can I ask what the reason for the stop was? I'm asking you to step out of the vehicle. I understand, Marcus said. I just want to understand why I was stopped. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't, sir. Bradock's voice dropped half a register. I'm not going to ask you again. Step out of the vehicle. And this is where most people would have stopped talking. This is where most people exhausted alone on an empty road facing a large man with a badge and a gun would have gotten out of the car, kept their eyes down, and answered every question as briefly as possible, hoping it would be over soon. Marcus knew that. He understood that impulse completely. But he thought about Ethan. He thought about what Ethan would be when he grew up, and what lessons a boy learns by watching how his father responds to injustice, even when his father thinks the boy isn't watching. He opened the door and got out of the car. Standing on the shoulder of Route 9 at 9:40 at night, with no other cars in either direction, and the sky a flat dark. Nothing overhead. Marcus Williams looked at Deputy Dale Bradock and said in a perfectly steady voice, I'd like to know the reason for this stop. Bradock studied him. He was doing what Marcus recognized as a performance of authority, the measured pause, the slow look up and down, the slight lean that says, I have all the time in the world, and you have none. I'm detecting an odor of marijuana coming from your vehicle, Bradock said. There's no marijuana in my vehicle, Marcus said. I'm telling you, I'm detecting an odor. With respect, Marcus said. I don't smoke. I've never smoked. There is nothing in my vehicle that smells like marijuana. Bradock tilted his head. Are you calling me a liar? I'm telling you what's in my vehicle, Marcus said. Which is nothing illegal. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something crossed Bradock's face. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. Like a man who had run this particular play 100 times and was encountering for the first time someone who didn't fall into the expected position. I'm going to need to search your vehicle, Bradock said. I don't consent to a search, Marcus said. The words came out quiet and clear, the way a man speaks when he's rehearsed something in his head 100 times and has finally arrived at the moment to say it. Bradock stared at him. What did you say? I don't consent to a search of my vehicle, Marcus repeated. If you believe you have probable cause, I understand that you can proceed, but I want to be clear that I am not giving my consent. The deputy was quiet for a long time. The flashlight was still in his hand, no longer pointing at Marcus's face, just hanging at his side, making a circle of light on the asphalt. Then Bradock smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that says you have no idea who you're dealing with. Stay here, Bradock said. He walked to his patrol car, and Marcus heard him on the radio, and Marcus stood very still in the dark and breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, and thought about Janet. No matter what happens, make sure Ethan grows up knowing his father never gave up. Yes, Marcus thought. Yes, I promise. Bradock came back 7 minutes later. I'm placing you under a brief investigatory detention, he said. I'm going to search your vehicle. You'll wait by my cruiser. Marcus didn't argue. He walked to the front of the patrol car and stood there, his hands loose at his sides, and he watched as Bradock opened the door of his old Civic and began going through it. The deputy was methodical. He started with the driver's side, checked under the seat in the door pockets behind the sun visor. Then the center console. Then the back seat, lifting the cushion, running his hands along the floor. Marcus watched. He watched Bradock's flashlight sweep through his car, the car with the baseball paperback Ethan had left on the back seat, the car with the Little League schedule magnetized to the inside of the dashboard, the car with the photo of Janet that Marcus kept clipped to the visor, her laughing at something off camera, her hair loose around her shoulders. He watched Bradock pull that photo out and look at it. And he watched Bradock set it on the seat like it was nothing. Like it was just an object. That was the moment. Not the illegal search. Not the false accusation. Not the power play. But that moment watching this man handle the only photo Marcus traveled with of his wife. Handle it like it was trash to be moved out of the way. That moment is what Marcus would remember years later when people asked him what had finally made him certain. Made you certain of what? Certain that he was going to do everything in his power to make sure this man never did this to anyone again. Bradock opened the glove compartment. His flashlight found the envelope immediately. He picked it up, turned it over, held it for a moment without opening it. Then he looked back at Marcus, standing by the cruiser. "What's in here?" "Cash," Marcus said. $500. Bradock opened the envelope. He fanned the bills out slowly, making sure Marcus could see him counting. "Where'd this come from?" he said. "I saved it," Marcus said. "It's my son's birthday money. I'm buying him a baseball glove." Bradock looked at the money. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the money again. "Cash like this raises red flags," he said. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "It's $500. I saved it over 3 months." "It could be connected to illegal activity," Bradock said. "It's not," Marcus said. "It's my son's birthday money." "I'm going to have to hold this," Bradock said. "Pending investigation." The words hit Marcus, the way a punch hits you in a dream. You feel it, but your body is a half-second behind in understanding what just happened. He stood very still. He kept his hands where they were. He breathed. "Under what legal authority?" Marcus said. Bradock pocketed the envelope. Just like that. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket in front of Marcus without breaking eye contact. "Civil asset forfeiture," Bradock said. "If the money isn't connected to criminal activity, you can file for its return." "That's my son's birthday money," Marcus said. His voice didn't break. It didn't rise. But something behind his eyes was completely, utterly still. The stillness of a man who has crossed a line inside himself that he will not be crossing back. "I earned that money. I saved it. It's for my son's birthday present." "You'll want to get a lawyer," Bradock said, walking back toward Marcus with his flashlight. "I'm going to issue you a warning for the traffic violation and let you go. You can file a civil forfeiture challenge. The process takes about 90 days. "What traffic violation?" Marcus said. "Improper lane position," Bradock said. "I was driving in the center of my lane," Marcus said. Bradock stopped in front of him. Very close. The way people stand when they want you to remember that they are larger than you. "Sir," he said quietly, "I would encourage you to go home. You've got a long drive. You mentioned you have a son waiting." The threat wasn't hidden. It wasn't even subtle. It was right there in the open, dressed up in the language of concern. "You have a son. Don't push this." Marcus looked at him. Looked directly at him the way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you have seen exactly who they are and you will not be pretending otherwise. "I'll need a receipt for the property you've seized," Marcus said. Bradock blinked. Then he wrote one. Slowly, without another word. Marcus took the receipt. He folded it. He put it in his wallet. Then he got in his car, started the engine, and pulled back onto Route 9. He drove exactly 4 miles before he pulled off again under the amber spill of a gas station light. He sat in the parking lot, and he pulled out his phone, and he navigated to the dashcam app. The footage was all there, every second of it. He watched it once from the beginning. Then he sat in the quiet for a long time with the gas station light overhead and the hum of the refrigerators inside the store coming faintly through the glass, and he thought about Robert Caulfield's face at the cookout. He thought about Denise Patterson and her granddaughter's school supplies. He thought about every person who had driven away from that same stretch of road, poorer than when they'd arrived and alone, and believing no one would help them. He thought about Ethan at home, waiting, not knowing yet that the birthday glove wasn't coming, not knowing yet that his father had just driven through a moment that neither of them would ever forget. Marcus looked at the footage one more time. Then he opened the county sheriff's website on his phone, found the complaint submission form, and began to type. His hands were completely steady. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Marcus's story has traveled. If you're new here, subscribe. Because what happens next is the part of this story that most people never get to see. The part where one dashcam video starts pulling on a thread that unravels 10 years of darkness, one stolen dollar at a time. The complaint form took Marcus 45 minutes to complete. Not because he didn't know what to write. He knew exactly what to write. He typed it the same way he'd stood on that road, carefully, deliberately, every word chosen, with the understanding that this document might be the only thing standing between truth and silence. He typed his name, his address, the date, the time, the location. He typed the deputy's name and badge number, which he'd memorized from the nameplate on Bradock's chest during those 40 minutes on the shoulder of Route 9. He described the stop in chronological order: the lights, the window, the demand, the false odor, claim, the non-consensual search, the envelope, the money, the receipt, the warning for a violation he hadn't committed. He typed the phrase, civil asset forfeiture, and felt something bitter move through him. He attached the dashcam footage. Then he sat there for a moment, his thumb hovering over the submit button, and he thought about all the other people who had probably sat somewhere just like this, in a parking lot, or at a kitchen table, or in a car on the side of a road, and filled out this same form, or one just like it, and pressed submit, and waited, and gotten nothing. He pressed submit. Then he drove home. Ethan was asleep when Marcus got in. He'd left the kitchen light on the way. He always did when Marcus worked late. A habit the boy had started on his own about a year after Janet passed, without anyone asking him to, without anyone explaining why it mattered. Marcus had never told him how much that small light meant. Some things you don't say because saying them would break something open that you don't have time to put back together on a Tuesday night. Marcus stood in the doorway of Ethan's room for a moment. The boy was curled on his side, one arm around the old stuffed dog he still slept with, and refused to admit. He slept with his face completely relaxed, the way kids' faces are when they're asleep. Unguarded, unworried, not yet carrying whatever the day had tried to put on them. Marcus watched him breathe. Then he went to his own room, sat on the edge of the bed, and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He talked to Janet, not out loud. He never did it out loud. That felt like a performance, and Janet had no patience for performance. She was the most direct person he'd ever known. She communicated in complete sentences and expected the same in return. So he just thought at her the way he'd learned to do in the years since the hospital. A cop took Ethan's birthday money tonight. $500. He just put it in his pocket. I filed a complaint. I don't know if it'll do anything. I don't know if I handled it right. He paused. I didn't break. I want you to know that. I kept my hands visible and my voice steady, and I didn't break. But I'm sitting here right now, and I'm so tired, Janet. I'm so tired of the world making simple things complicated. I just wanted to buy the kid a baseball glove. He lay back on the bed with his clothes still on and stared at the ceiling. I'll figure it out, he thought. I always do. He was asleep in 8 minutes. The next morning, Ethan was at the breakfast table eating cereal when Marcus came down, and the boy looked up and immediately said, "You look terrible." "Good morning to you too," Marcus said. "I'm serious, Dad. Did you sleep at all?" "I slept fine." "Your eyes are all—" Ethan made a gesture with his hands that Marcus couldn't interpret. "Puffy," Marcus said. "I was going to say old," Ethan said. Marcus poured himself coffee and sat down across from his son and looked at this 10-year-old boy who had his mother's eyes and his grandmother's mouth and some quality, entirely his own, that Marcus still hadn't found a word for, a kind of straight-backed honesty, an unwillingness to soften things unnecessarily, that was somehow never cruel. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said. Ethan put his spoon down. He did this when serious conversations were coming, stopped whatever he was doing, and gave you his full attention. Another Janet quality. "Your birthday glove," Marcus said. "I had the money for it. I was bringing it home last night." "Okay," Ethan said slowly. "A police officer stopped me on Route 9. He took the money." Ethan stared at him. "He took it." It's called civil asset forfeiture, Marcus said. It means, I know what it means, Ethan said. We learned about it in school. Mr. Hennessy said it's when cops take your stuff and you have to prove it wasn't connected to crime to get it back. He paused. He took Ethan's birthday money. Marcus almost smiled despite everything. He took my money, yes. But it was for my glove. It was. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to get it back? I'm going to try, Marcus said. Did you do anything wrong? No. Then why did he take it? Marcus wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. This was the question, the one that had no simple answer. The one that had 100 complicated answers, none of which were adequate, and all of which were true. He looked at his son and decided to tell him the most honest version of what he knew. Because he believed that I wouldn't fight back, Marcus said. Ethan considered this for a long moment. But you are fighting back. Yes, Marcus said. I am. Ethan picked up his spoon again. Okay, he said, and went back to his cereal. Marcus sat with that for a second. Then he said, You're not upset about the glove. Ethan shrugged. I mean, yeah, but you're fighting back, so it'll work out. The absolute confidence in that sentence stated as simply as a weather forecast. It will work out. Hit Marcus somewhere behind the sternum. He cleared his throat. Don't be late for school, he said. I'm never late, Ethan said. Marcus heard nothing for 11 days. Not silence. Exactly, the complaint submission had generated an automated confirmation email that told him his report had been received and would be reviewed by the Office of Professional Standards within 30 business days. 30 business days. Marcus had done the math. That was 6 weeks. 6 weeks for someone to read a complaint and decide whether it warranted investigation, while the man who had robbed him continued driving Route 9 every night. On the 12th day, he called the sheriff's department directly. He was transferred 3 times before reaching someone in the professional standards office, a woman named Clerk Hendricks, who spoke in the measured, slightly apologetic tone of someone whose job involves managing expectations. Yes, Mr. Williams, I see your complaint in the system. It's currently assigned for review. These processes do take time. I understand that, Marcus said. I'm calling because I submitted dashcam footage with my complaint. I want to make sure it was received. I can see a file attachment was submitted, Hendricks said. Has anyone reviewed it? A pause. These matters are reviewed in the order they're received, Mr. Williams. I understand the process, Marcus said. My question is whether anyone has watched the footage I submitted. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not able to share details about the status of ongoing reviews. Miss Hendricks, Marcus said. A deputy sheriff stopped me without cause, conducted an illegal search of my vehicle, and seized $500 in cash from me on the side of the road. I have the entire incident on video. I'm not asking for the outcome of the review. I'm asking whether the evidence has been looked at. The silence on the other end of the line had a particular quality, the quality of someone choosing their words very carefully. Your complaint is in the system and will be reviewed, Hendricks said. We take all complaints seriously. Thank you, Marcus said, and hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up his phone again and called his cousin, Deshaun. Deshaun Williams was 2 years older than Marcus, a former Army MP who now worked in private security and spent most of his free time with the particular focus of a man who channeled frustration into productive labor, running a community advocacy group called the Accountability Project out of a rented office above a dry cleaning shop in Millbrook. Deshaun had been doing this work for 9 years. He knew every police complaint process in the county by name and by temperament. He knew which supervisors read complaints and which ones filed them unopened. He knew which lawyers took civil rights cases and which ones were too scared of the system to push back against it. He had been called by more than one local official a troublemaker. He wore this designation like a badge of honor. When Marcus called him, Deshaun picked up on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, Deshaun said. Marcus paused. You heard? Robert Caulfield called me this morning. Said he ran into your mother at the pharmacy and she told him what happened. A brief silence. You filed a complaint. Night it happened, Marcus said. Good. Do you have footage? Full dashcam recording, audio and video. Deshaun exhaled slowly. Marcus had known his cousin long enough to know that particular exhale it meant Deshaun was recalibrating his understanding of a situation. Marcus, Deshaun said, if what you're describing is on camera. Every word, Marcus said. Stop the search, him taking the money, all of it. Did you state clearly that you weren't consenting to the search? On camera, yes. Did you ask for the reason for the stop? Multiple times. Did he give one? He said he smelled marijuana. There was no marijuana. I don't smoke. Deshaun was quiet for a moment. Okay. Don't send that footage to anyone else yet. Don't post it online. Don't share it with anyone except your lawyer. I don't have a lawyer, Marcus said. You're about to, Deshaun said. I'm calling Catherine Reeves. You remember her? Marcus thought for a second. The civil rights attorney, she did that case. 3 years ago, yes. She sued the county over their stop and frisk policy. She's good, Marcus. She's very good. And when I tell her you have dashcam footage of the whole thing, she's going to want to talk to you today. I have work tonight, Marcus said. Call in, Deshaun said. This is more important. I can't just... Marcus. Deshaun's voice shifted slightly, not louder, just more direct, the voice he used when he was done being patient with someone not understanding the weight of a situation. Listen to me. You've been sitting on footage of Dale Bradock stealing your money for 11 days. Dale Bradock, who has been working that road for 10 years. Who has had 47 complaints filed against him that all went nowhere. If what you have is what you're describing, this is not just your complaint. This is every person he's done this to who didn't have a camera. Do you understand what I'm saying? Marcus was quiet. 47 complaints, he said. At minimum, Deshaun said. That's just the ones I know about. The ones people actually filed. The actual number of people he's done this to. Deshaun stopped. I don't even want to speculate about that number. Marcus sat with that for a moment. 47 complaints. 47 people who had gone through the process, filled out the forms, made the calls, talked to Clerk Hendricks or someone like her, waited the 30 business days, and ended up with nothing. 47 complaints that had been received and reviewed and filed and forgotten while Dale Bradock continued showing up to work. Call Catherine Reeves, Marcus said. Catherine Reeves met Marcus at her office the following evening. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the manner of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time and had long since stopped being surprised by anything. Her office was modest bookshelves, floor-to-ceiling stacks of files on every flat surface, a framed photograph on the wall of a large group of people standing on courthouse steps, grinning, some of them with fists raised. She watched the dashcam footage twice, the full thing from beginning to end, without speaking. When it finished the second time, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk. Walk me through your state of mind when you installed the camera, she said. I'd heard stories about that road, Marcus said. About Bradock specifically. I wanted a record in case something happened. Had anything happened to you before on that road? No, that was the first time he'd ever stopped me. But you knew to put the camera in. I knew it was possible, Marcus said. Reeves nodded slowly. And when he searched the vehicle, you understood that you'd said clearly on camera that you weren't consenting. Yes. Were you afraid? The question surprised him slightly. Yes, he said. But you said it anyway. Yes. She looked at him for a moment. Why? Marcus thought about it. Because my son is going to grow up, he said. And he's going to drive on roads. And I needed to know that I'd done everything I could. Reeves was quiet. Then she picked up the external drive he'd given her with the footage on it and turned it over in her hands. Mr. Williams, she said, I want to be honest with you about what this process looks like. Filing a civil suit is not fast. It is not painless. You will be scrutinized. Your finances, your record, your history, everything will be examined. The county will have lawyers whose only job is to find reasons to discredit you. They will suggest that the money was suspicious. They will suggest your driving was suspicious. They will suggest that you were antagonistic and confrontational and that Bradock was simply following procedure. I understand, Marcus said. They will also try to settle, she continued. They'll offer you money, probably a number that sounds significant, and ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement and go away. The money would be faster, but it would mean Bradock stays on the road. I don't want to settle, Marcus said. Reeves looked at him. I want to make sure you understand what you're choosing. This will take time. It will take energy. There will be moments when you wonder whether it's worth it. Ms. Reeves, Marcus said, I'm a single father working double shifts. I don't have time for anything that isn't worth it. Something moved across Catherine Reeves's face, not quite a smile, but close. She put the external drive down on her desk. Then we're going to need full copies of every document from the night in question, she said. The receipt he gave you, the warning citation, anything in writing. I'll file a formal records request for the patrol car footage and the radio logs from that night. I'll also start pulling Bradock's full complaint history through official channels, which will take... Deshaun Williams said there are at least 47 complaints, Marcus said. Reeves stopped. Deshaun is... my cousin, the Accountability Project. Right. She paused. I know Deshaun's work. His number might actually be conservative. She folded her hands on the desk. Here's what I want you to do. Go home. Don't discuss this publicly, not on social media, not at work, not with people outside your immediate family. Don't reach out to the deputy or the department directly. And if anyone from the sheriff's department calls you about the complaint, you tell them that you're represented by counsel and give them my number. Okay, Marcus said. One more thing, Reeves said, and her voice shifted slightly quieter, more direct. If this goes where I think it might go, it's going to get large. Media attention possibly. Public attention definitely. The county will not like what's on that footage. There will be pressure on you, on your family. Are you prepared for that? Marcus thought about Ethan eating cereal at the breakfast table. It'll work out, stated like a fact. I'm prepared, Marcus said. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, sitting in Catherine Reeves's office, was that on the same night he was filing his complaint 300 miles away, a man named Gerald Okafor was doing something similar. Okafor was 44, a civil engineer who had been driving through Bradock's County on his way to a conference when he'd been stopped on Route 9 18 months earlier. Bradock had taken $1,100 from him, money Okafor had been carrying for a contractor who was doing work on his mother's house. Okafor had filed a complaint. The complaint had been reviewed and closed without action, same as the others. But Okafor hadn't stopped there. He'd hired his own attorney. He'd submitted FOIA requests for traffic stop data going back 5 years. He'd been quietly building a parallel case in a different jurisdiction, and his attorney had been in contact with the county for months, pushing documenting waiting. When Catherine Reeves filed her formal records request for Bradock's complaint history 2 weeks after meeting with Marcus, it landed on the desk of a deputy county counsel named Thomas Birch, a 40-year-old attorney who had spent 6 years managing liability for the sheriff's department, and who had for the last 18 months been increasingly aware that a particular set of files in his cabinet represented a problem that was only getting worse. Birch read the Reeves filing. He read the attached complaint. He read the notation about dashcam footage. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a very long time. He'd seen this before, a civil complaint from someone who claimed they had evidence, and the evidence turned out to be minimal, ambiguous, easily challenged. The county's legal team had defeated cases like that before. It was part of the job. But something about the specificity of this filing bothered him. The claimant had documented the stop time, the badge number, the exact language of the forfeiture claim. The attorney was Catherine Reeves, who didn't file weak cases. And the footage, if there was actually clear footage, Birch pulled the Bradock complaint file from his cabinet. He hadn't opened it in 3 months. He'd started thinking of it the way you think about a water stain on the ceiling that keeps getting bigger, aware of it, not ready to deal with it, telling yourself it probably isn't as bad as it looks. He opened it now. It took him 20 minutes to go through the full file. When he was done, he closed it, stood up, walked to his window and looked out at the parking lot for a while. Then he went back to his desk and typed an email to his supervisor, the county council. The subject line read, "Bradock recommend escalation." Marcus didn't know any of this was happening. He was working nights at the warehouse coaching Little League on Saturday mornings, making lunches, checking homework, doing all the things that needed doing. Catherine Reeves had told him the process would take time and had asked him to be patient, and Marcus was trying. But patience when you're waiting for a system you've never been able to fully trust to do the right thing feels a lot like holding your breath. He did have one conversation in that period that he would later think of as important. 3 weeks after his meeting with Reeves, he was at the barbershop on a Saturday afternoon, the same barbershop where he'd first heard Robert Caulfield's story about Route 9, where a rotation of men from the neighborhood came and went and talked the way men talk when they're sitting still for 20 minutes and their guard is down. Howe was in the chair, and the man next to him, a heavy-set man named Preston, whom Marcus knew slightly, a deacon at the Baptist church on 4th Street, was telling a story to the barber. He was describing a traffic stop. Route 9. 2 years ago, he'd lost $600. He'd filed a complaint. Nothing had happened. Marcus said, "Preston." Preston looked over. "The deputy who stopped you," Marcus said. Was his name Bradock? Preston set down his phone slowly. "Yeah," he said. "How do you know that?" "He stopped me 6 weeks ago," Marcus said. "Took $500. The barbershop went quiet. Not completely quiet. The clippers were still running, a radio was still playing somewhere in the back, but the particular human noise of conversation dropped out. "He stopped my brother-in-law too," said the barber. A man named Curtis, whom Marcus had been coming to for 3 years. 3 years ago, said he smelled something. Took $400. "Same road," Marcus said. "Route 9, Curtis said. "Did he file a complaint?" "My brother-in-law." Curtis made a sound. "Man, what was the point? Nobody does anything." "I filed one," Marcus said. Curtis looked at him in the mirror. "And I had footage," Marcus said. "I'm working with a lawyer now." The room was very quiet. "What kind of footage?" Preston said. "Dashcam," Marcus said. "The whole thing. Him searching the car, taking the money, everything." Preston and Curtis exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that contains an entire conversation, surprise and recognition, and something cautious that was maybe very carefully beginning to become hope. "What lawyer?" Preston asked. "Catherine Reeves," Marcus said. Another look. Curtis put the clippers down. "Preston," Curtis said. "Yeah," Preston said. "You still got the paperwork from your complaint?" Preston was already pulling out his phone. "I'm going to call my wife. She keeps everything." The man in the third chair. A young guy. Marcus didn't know, maybe 25, who had been silent the whole time, looked up from his phone. "My uncle got stopped on Route 9 last year," he said. "Lost $800. He didn't file anything because he didn't think..." He stopped. "Should I call him?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "Tell him to call Catherine Reeves." The barber finished Marcus's cut in relative silence, but the silence was a different kind now, not the absence of something, but the presence of something that was gathering itself, taking shape, figuring out what it was. When Marcus got up to pay, Curtis waved him off. "This one's on me," Curtis said, and didn't explain why, and didn't need to. 6 days after the barbershop conversation, Catherine Reeves called Marcus at 7 in the morning. He was making Ethan's lunch. He set down the bread and picked up the phone. "I need to tell you something," Reeves said, "and I want you to listen to all of it before you respond." "Okay," Marcus said. "I've been contacted by an attorney representing a Gerald Okafor out of Allegheny County. Mr. Okafor was stopped on Route 9 18 months ago. He has an independent complaint file and extensive documentation of traffic stop patterns going back 5 years that his attorney compiled through FOIA requests." A brief pause. "He wants to coordinate." Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter. "Coordinate how?" His attorney has data showing a statistically significant racial disparity in traffic stops on that stretch of Route 9 over a 10-year period. Black drivers were stopped at a rate that cannot be explained by any non-discriminatory variable. combined with the complaint history, which I now have through official channels. Marcus and Deshawn was not exaggerating. The number is 63 over 10 years. 63 complaints against this deputy that were reviewed internally and closed and combined with your footage. We're looking at a potential pattern and practice case, not just an individual civil claim. Marcus was quiet. That's a different kind of lawsuit, Reeves said. It's larger, it's more complex, and it has the potential to compel systemic change, new policies, new oversight, mandatory body cameras, independent review of forfeiture cases. It also attracts more attention. Media attention. I need you to understand that. 63 complaints, Marcus said. 63. I thought about that number. 63 people who had gone to the system and been turned away. 63 stories filed and closed. 63 Prestons. 63 brother-in-laws of Curtis. 63 human beings who had driven down Route 9 and come home with less than they'd left with. What do we need from me? Marcus said. Your footage is the centerpiece, Reeves said. Without it, we have patterns and testimonies which are significant but challengeable. With it, we have direct evidence of the behavior, unambiguous, on record. He's still working, Marcus said. Bradock, he's still on that road. I know, Reeves said. How long until... Marcus, she said, and her voice was steady and honest in the way he'd come to appreciate. I can't give you a timeline. What I can tell you is that we are no longer one person filing a complaint. We are building something, and it's getting harder to ignore. Marcus looked at his son's lunch half-assembled on the counter. Peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, those little crackers Ethan liked. Okay, Marcus said. Tell me what you need from me next, Reeves told him. He listened, asked 2 questions, thanked her, and hung up. Then he finished making the sandwich. That evening after Ethan was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and did something he hadn't done since Janet died. He got out a legal pad, the old yellow kind she had always kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery lists and notes to herself, and he wrote down everything he knew. He wrote down the date of the stop. He wrote down every detail he remembered, things he hadn't even included in the formal complaint. The exact way Bradock had handled Janet's photo, setting it aside, like an object. The precise words of the threat at the end. You've got a long drive. You mentioned you have a son waiting. He wrote down what he'd thought, and what he'd felt, and what he'd chosen. He wrote down Ethan's face at the breakfast table. It'll work out. He wrote down 63. He looked at that number for a while. 63 complaints. 10 years. 1 road. 1 deputy with a badge and a pocket, and a system that had been protecting him every time someone tried to hold him accountable. Marcus thought about the night he'd installed the dash cam. The clerk at the electronics store who had helped him choose the model, a young woman probably 22, who had asked what he needed it for, and he'd said just in case, and she'd nodded, like that was a complete sentence, because for certain people in certain situations just in case is always a complete sentence. I thought about sitting in the parking lot under the gas station lights that night, watching the footage for the first time. The steadiness he'd felt. The clarity. This wasn't just about his $500 anymore. He'd understood that in the parking lot, and he'd been living with it ever since, the knowledge that what happened to him was one iteration of something that had been happening over and over on that road to people like him for a decade. He uncapped the pen again and wrote one more thing at the bottom of the page. 63 people didn't have a camera. I did. He capped the pen. He folded the legal pad. He put it in the kitchen drawer in the same spot where Janet used to keep it. Then he turned off the light and went to bed. The call from the county came on a Thursday morning 7 weeks after Marcus had filed his complaint. He was in the break room at the warehouse eating a sandwich between shifts when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He'd learned in the weeks since the barbershop conversation to be careful about unknown numbers. A local news station had somehow gotten his information and called twice, and Reeves had been very clear that all media inquiries went through her. But something made him pick up. Mr. Williams. A man's voice. Measured, professional, with the particular dryness of someone who spends most of his day on the phone, managing things he'd rather not manage. My name is Thomas Birch. I'm Deputy County Counsel for the Sheriff's Department. I'm calling regarding your complaint filed on. I'm represented by counsel, Marcus said. Catherine Reeves. You should be speaking with her. A pause. I'm aware of Ms. Reeves's involvement. I'm calling you directly as a courtesy, Mr. Williams. Not in any official capacity. I'd like to have an informal conversation. Marcus set down his sandwich. Mr. Birch, with respect, I'm going to ask you again to contact my attorney. Any conversation about this matter goes through her. That's not a negotiation. Another pause, longer this time. I understand, Birch said. And then before hanging up, Mr. Williams, for what it's worth, I'd encourage you to let Ms. Reeves know that the department is taking your complaint seriously. That's all I'll say. The line went dead. Marcus sat for a moment looking at his phone. Then he called Reeves. She picked up on the first ring. Thomas Birch just called me directly, Marcus said. A beat of silence. Describe the conversation. He did. When he finished, Reeves was quiet for a moment, in a way that Marcus had learned to read, not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence of someone processing new information against an existing map and finding that the two don't quite align. He called you directly, she said. Not my office. You. Yes. And he specifically said the department was taking your complaint seriously. Those were his words. Another pause. Marcus, that call was not a courtesy. That was reconnaissance. He was trying to figure out how resolute you are, how prepared you are, whether there's any daylight between you and your attorney. The fact that he called you directly, instead of going through me, tells me something. What does it tell you? That something has changed internally, Reeves said. Something that's made them nervous enough to try and get a read on you before it goes further. She paused again. I'm going to make a call. Don't speak to anyone from the department again without going through me first. Understood, Marcus said. What Marcus didn't know, what Reeves was beginning to piece together from her own sources, was what had changed internally at the department. It had started, ironically, not with Marcus's complaint or Gerald Okafor's parallel case, but with a spreadsheet. An analyst in the county's risk management department, a 29-year-old named Donna Keller, who had been hired the previous year to review liability exposure across county operations, had been running routine data pulls on traffic stop outcomes when she'd noticed something in the Route 9 figures. She'd flagged it internally as a potential actuarial concern, the way an analyst flags anything that represents unusual numerical deviation, without necessarily understanding the full human story behind the numbers. The flag went to her supervisor, who sent it to Birch's office as a matter of routine. Birch had set it aside for 3 weeks. His desk, in the way of all desks in overworked legal offices, accumulated more flags than any one person could attend to promptly. But then, Marcus's complaint had landed. And then Reeves's formal records request. And Birch had finally opened the Bradock complaint file in full. And then he'd pulled Keller's spreadsheet, and the two documents sitting side by side on his desk had produced in him the specific stomach-dropping sensation of a man who realizes too late that what he thought was a small problem is actually a very large problem, wearing a small problem's clothing. The spreadsheet showed across a 5-year period that traffic stops on a specific 3-mile stretch of Route 9 during Bradock's shifts resulted in cash seizures at a rate 17 times higher than the county average for comparable rural highway segments. Black drivers represented 68% of those stops, despite representing 19% of the estimated driver population on that road. 68%. Birch had stared at that number for a long time. How was a lawyer? He understood what that number would look like in front of a federal judge. He understood what it would look like on the front page of a newspaper. He understood with the particular clarity of someone whose job is to anticipate liability, that if Catherine Reeves got hold of that spreadsheet through discovery, and she would absolutely get it through discovery, the county's legal position would not merely be weak. It would be catastrophic. He'd sent the email to his supervisor that same afternoon. Recommend escalation. His supervisor had escalated. The sheriff himself, a 22-year veteran named Carl Myers, had been briefed within 48 hours. And Sheriff Carl Myers, to his credit, had not done what Thomas Birch had half expected him to do, which was to circle the wagons and start managing the narrative. Instead, he'd sat behind his desk for a very long time, looking at the spreadsheet and the complaint file and the records request from Catherine Reeves. And then he'd said quietly to the two people in the room with him, Get me IA. Tonight. Marcus knew none of this. He was coaching Little League on a Saturday morning, standing behind the chain-link backstop, watching Ethan take batting practice, when Deshaun appeared at the edge of the field and signaled with a tilt of his head. Marcus walked over. "Something's happening," Deshaun said quietly. "What kind of something?" "I have a source inside the department. Not going to say who. But there's an internal affairs investigation that's been opened. Official, not informal. Bradock has been placed on administrative desk duty pending review." Marcus looked at him. "Desk duty." "As of Wednesday," Deshaun said. "He's off Route 9. "For how long?" "That depends on what IA finds," Deshaun said. "Which depends on what they're looking for, which depends on whether they're actually looking or just going through motions." He paused. "You should call Reeves." "I'll call her after practice," Marcus said. "Marcus." "My son is up to bat," Marcus said, and turned back to the field. Ethan connected on the second pitch, a solid hit that sent the ball past the shortstop and into shallow left field. And the boy took off running with his arms pumping and his expression completely focused in the way Marcus loved that total absorption in what was directly in front of you, that children manage effortlessly and adults spend their whole lives trying to get back. "That's it, Marcus said. Not loud, just to himself. "That's it." He called Reeves after practice. She confirmed what Deshaun had heard and added 3 things Marcus didn't know. First, that the internal investigation had been initiated by the sheriff personally, which was unusual, and suggested it was being taken seriously rather than buried. Second, that the investigative scope, based on what her sources could determine, extended beyond Marcus's complaint to a broader review of Bradock's traffic stop history. Third, that 2 days earlier, the county had received a formal demand letter from Gerald Okafor's attorney, and the simultaneous pressure from 2 independent legal actions appeared to have accelerated everything. "What does this mean for the civil case?" Marcus asked. "It complicates it in some ways and strengthens it in others," Reeves said. "If IA finds cause to act, it validates our claim substantially. If they don't, if this is just the department managing optics, and Bradock goes back on the road in 60 days, it tells us we need to go harder in federal court." "Which do you think it is?" A pause. "I think," Reeves said carefully, "that Thomas Birch is a careful man who doesn't want a federal civil rights case on his hands. I think the sheriff may be a more principled man than I gave him credit for. And I think the combination of your footage, Okafor's data, and the complaint history is a weight that is getting difficult for reasonable people inside that department to ignore." She paused again. "But I've been doing this long enough to know that institutions protect themselves first and do the right thing second, if at all. I'm not counting on anything until something is in writing." "Neither am I," Marcus said. The newspaper story ran on a Wednesday 4 days after that conversation. Marcus didn't find out about it until Curtis called him from the barber shop at 6:30 in the morning. "You seen the paper?" Curtis said. "I've been up for 20 minutes, Marcus said. "Look at the county section, front of the county section." He pulled it up on his phone. The headline read, "Sheriff's Deputy, Under Internal Review, Amid Allegations of Systematic Traffic Stop Abuses." The article was careful, the kind of careful that means a reporter has solid sourcing but is managing legal exposure. It described the internal investigation without attributing its opening to any specific complaint. It described a pattern of stops on Route 9 and referenced a county risk assessment that had flagged unusual seizure rates. It quoted a spokesperson for the sheriff's department saying the matter was under review and the department was committed to accountability. It did not mention Marcus Williams by name. It did not mention dashcam footage. But it said enough. Marcus put the phone down and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he heard Ethan's alarm go off down the hall, the sound of the boy stirring the creak of the floor, the familiar thump of feet hitting the ground, and he went to the kitchen to start breakfast. I wasn't ready to feel relieved. He didn't trust relief yet. But something had shifted some weight that had been sitting in his chest since the night on Route 9 had moved fractionally like a door beginning to open on a very stiff hinge. His phone was ringing by 8 o'clock. Deshaun. Reeves. His mother. Preston from church. Curtis. The young guy from the barber shop whose uncle had lost $800. A woman he didn't know named Cheryl Simmons, who said she'd gotten his number from a mutual contact, who said she was a retired school teacher who had lost her monthly savings on Route 9 6 years ago, who said she'd cried when she read the newspaper article, who said, "I didn't think anyone was ever going to listen." Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the phone and talked to each of them. He told each of them the same thing: talk to Catherine Reeves. By 10 o'clock, Reeves had received 11 calls from people with Route 9 stories. By the end of the week, it was 23. They ranged across a decade. A man who'd lost money he was carrying to pay a plumber. A young woman, 26 at the time, who'd been stopped twice in 3 months on the same stretch of road. A father who'd had $1,200 seized that he was planning to use for his daughter's first year of college expenses. Not tuition. The other things. The dorm supplies, the bedding, the laptop, the 100 small necessities of a child leaving home for the first time. Each story had the same basic architecture: a stop, a claim of suspicious odor, a search, a demand about cash, a citation for something minor or nothing at all, and then the drive home, poorer and more alone than the drive out. And in nearly every case, when Reeves asked whether a complaint had been filed, the answer was some version of the same thing: "I thought about it. I didn't think it would matter. I didn't think anyone would believe me." Or, "I filed one. Nothing happened." Or the one that Marcus found hardest to hear, when Reeves relayed it to him from Cheryl Simmons, the retired school teacher. "I was embarrassed. I know that's strange to say. But I felt ashamed. Like I had done something wrong by getting into the situation in the first place, even though I hadn't done anything." Marcus heard that and sat with it for a long time, because he understood it. That was the part that never made it into the formal complaint, never made it onto the dashcam footage, never showed up in the spreadsheets or the statistical analyses. The interior cost. The way that kind of violation doesn't just take your money. It takes something harder to name something in your sense of how the world is supposed to work and your place in it, and it leaves a gap there that's difficult to fill and nearly impossible to explain. He thought about the night he'd sat on the edge of his bed and talked to Janet. "I didn't break." Why had it felt so important to say that? Because breaking was possible. Because the situation was designed to break you. Designed so thoroughly over so many iterations that most people cracked under the pressure in the parking lot and drove home and tried to forget. I had the camera. That was the difference. Not in character, not in courage, just in the presence or absence of one small recording device behind a rearview mirror. 63 complaints, and now 23 more coming in. 86 people. Probably more who never filed, never called a lawyer, never told anyone but their family. A decade of a man reaching into people's cars and taking what he wanted, because the system had made him comfortable in his confidence that no one could stop him. Marcus thought about Bradock's face that night. The smile, the slow, deliberate count of the bills. You can either leave now or make this much worse for yourself. He thought about how certain Bradock had been, and he thought that certainty is the most damning thing about the whole situation. A man doesn't smile like that unless he's done it many times before. A man doesn't issue that specific threat in that specific language with that specific calm unless he's issued it successfully enough times that it's become rote. That smile had a history. Marcus's dashcam footage had captured one frame of a story that stretched back 10 years. Catherine Reeves requested an urgent meeting with Marcus and Gerald Okafor's attorney, a man named Stephen Park, headquartered out of Pittsburgh, 3 weeks after the newspaper article ran. They met in Reeves' office on a Tuesday afternoon. Park was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe 35, with a precise manner and a habit of pulling up documents on his tablet mid-sentence to cross-reference things as he spoke. He and Reeves had clearly already been in contact extensively. They finished each other's legal points the way people do when they've been working in parallel on the same problem. Marcus sat across from both of them and listened. Park laid out what his investigation had built. 5 years of traffic stop data from Route 9, broken down by race time of day outcome and deputy ID. The pattern was not subtle. When Bradock was on shift stops involving black drivers, increased by a factor that no reasonable model could explain through anything other than intentional targeting. Cash seizures during those stops followed a curve that bore no relationship to the nominal bases. Cited suspicious odor claims occurred in 58% of stops involving black drivers and 9% of stops involving white drivers. The seizure amounts also follow a pattern, Park said, pulling up a chart. He tends toward amounts in the $300 to $1,200 range, small enough that civil forfeiture challenges aren't economically rational for most people. The legal cost exceeds the recovery. Large enough to be meaningful to the individuals targeted. It's, and I want to be careful about the word I use here. Calculated, Reeves said. Calculated, Park agreed. This is not impulsive behavior. The data shows a consistency that suggests deliberate targeting within a specific financial range. Marcus looked at the chart. He didn't say anything. The county's risk data corroborates this independently, Reeves said. Keller's spreadsheet, which we now have through discovery, shows the same pattern from a different angle. The county's own internal data was flagging this as a liability issue before our cases were filed. That's going to be very important in front of a judge. What are we building toward? Marcus said. Park and Reeves looked at each other. Federal civil rights complaint, Reeves said. Pattern and practice of 4th and 14th Amendment violations. We're naming Bradock individually and the county institutionally. The department's failure to act on 63 previous complaints constitutes deliberate indifference under existing case law. The county knows this is coming, Park said. Birch has been in contact with my office. They want to explore settlement. What kind of settlement? Marcus said. Full financial restitution to all documented victims, Reeves said. Mandatory policy overhaul, independent review of forfeiture cases, mandatory body cameras, revised training protocols, and, she paused, the question of Bradock himself. What about him? Marcus said. The county can't settle a federal civil rights pattern and practice case and keep the central figure in that pattern on the payroll, Park said. It's not legally tenable. Whatever happens with the criminal side, and that's a separate track out of our hands on the civil side. Any settlement agreement will require his removal from the department. Marcus looked at him. What's the criminal side? Reeves leaned forward slightly. Marcus, the IA investigation has been ongoing for 8 weeks. My understanding, and this is from sources not official confirmation, is that they have found cause to refer the matter to the DA's office for criminal review. The DA will decide independently whether to prosecute. Criminal charges, Marcus said. It's not guaranteed, Reeves said. The DA has discretion. But the IA findings combined with our civil documentation, combined with your footage. She stopped. Your footage is the thing, Marcus. I want you to understand that. Everything else is pattern and data and testimony, all of which is significant and all of which is challengeable on the margins. Your footage is not challengeable. It shows clearly and on record a deputy sheriff seizing cash from a private citizen with no legal basis, while that citizen calmly and clearly asserts his rights. There is nothing ambiguous about it. It is the thing that ties everything else together. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Cheryl Simmons, he said. The retired school teacher. She told you she felt ashamed. She thought she'd done something wrong. Yes, Reeves said. Is she going to be part of this? She's one of the 23 who called, Reeves said. She wants to be involved. The father whose daughter's college money was taken. Raymond Fuller, yes. Preston from my church. Yes. Marcus looked down at the table for a moment. When he looked up, his expression was steady. Whatever you recommend on the settlement question, whether we take it or go to trial. I want those people in the room when we decide. It's not just my case. Park looked at Reeves. Reeves looked at Marcus for a long moment. That's not standard procedure, she said. I know, Marcus said. I'm asking you to do it anyway. Another long moment. I'll organize a meeting, she said. The meeting was held in the community room of the Baptist Church on 4th Street, Preston's church, on a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks later. 21 people came. Some with spouses. Some alone. Some with adult children who'd driven them and sat beside them and held their hands. They ranged in age from 26 to 73. They were a nurse, a teacher, a plumber, an engineer, a mechanic, a retired postal worker, A grocery store manager, a woman who ran a hair salon, a man who drove a school bus. They were all black. They had all driven Route 9. They had all lost money to the same man. Reeves stood at the front of the room with Park and explained the case. The legal strategy, the settlement framework the county had proposed, and the alternative of going to trial. She explained the risks of both paths in plain language without softening. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then, Cheryl Simmons, 73 years old, with white hair and reading glasses, and the particular dignity of a woman who had spent 35 years teaching other people's children and was not accustomed to feeling small, raised her hand. "I want to say something," she said, "before we talk about what we're going to do." Reeves nodded. "I want to say that for 6 years I believed this was partly my fault." Cheryl's voice was steady, but something underneath it was working very hard. "I had $400 in my purse. I was bringing it to my sister. That man stopped me and took it, and I drove home. And I told myself that I shouldn't have been carrying cash. I shouldn't have been on that road at night. I should have done something differently." She paused. "And I was wrong about that. It took me 6 years and a young man with a dash cam to understand that I was wrong about that. And I don't want anyone else to spend 6 years believing what I believed." The room was very quiet. From the back, Raymond Fuller, the man whose daughter's college money had been taken, said, "I hear you, Cheryl." "I know you do," Cheryl said, and sat back down. Marcus was sitting to the side, not at the front. He hadn't spoken yet. He'd been listening. Now Preston looked at him. "Marcus, you started this. What do you think we should do?" Marcus looked around the room. He looked at each face, 21 people who had each driven away from the same stretch of road, carrying the same invisible wound. "I think," he said slowly, "that we should do whatever gets Bradock off that road permanently and makes it hardest for the next one to operate the same way. I think the settlement gets us there faster. I think going to trial gets us there more publicly." He paused. "But I don't think that's actually the choice we're making. I think the real choice is whether we trust that what we're building here is solid enough to push for everything, not just money, not just his badge, but the policy changes. The oversight. The things that make it harder for the system to protect the next Bradock the way it protected this one." He looked at Reeves. "Is it solid enough?" Reeves met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "It is." "Then I think we push for everything," Marcus said. "And I think we do it together." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Preston said, "Seconded." And Cheryl Simmons said, "Yes." And Raymond Fuller said, "Let's go." What happened in the 2 weeks after that meeting moved faster than anything that had happened in the previous 4 months. Reeves formally declined the county's initial settlement offer and submitted a counter-proposal that expanded the scope of required policy changes and increased the restitution amounts to reflect all 23 documented victims, rather than just the original complainants. Park simultaneously filed a federal civil rights complaint in the Eastern District, which had the effect of moving the case into a jurisdiction that the county's local legal team had less comfort operating in. Birch at the county was reportedly not sleeping well. The newspaper that had run the first story ran a follow-up, this one more specific, quoting Reeves on the pattern and practice claims, quoting statistical summaries from Park's data, noting the federal filing. A television news station picked it up the same afternoon. By that evening, the story had moved outside the county, picked up by a regional affiliate, then a national one. Marcus's phone rang constantly. He didn't answer the press calls, they all went to Reeves's office. But he noticed in the days after the national pickup something change in his daily life in ways that were small but not meaningless. The looks at the warehouse. The conversations at Ethan's school when he dropped his son off, parents who approached him, who said his name, who said things like, "We're with you," or "Thank you for doing this." A woman at the grocery store who was a stranger and who stopped him in the cereal aisle and said, "Are you the man with the dash cam on Route 9? And when he said yes, she said, "My nephew, 3 years ago. I'm glad someone finally..." And she stopped and pressed her lips together and walked away. He told none of this to Ethan directly. But Ethan was 10 and sharper than his age, and after the third night in a row of Marcus getting phone calls, He had to take in the other room. The boy looked up from his homework and said, "Is it getting bigger, Dad?" Marcus sat down across from him. "What do you mean?" "Your case," Ethan said. "Is it getting bigger than just us?" Marcus looked at his son. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Ethan nodded, processing this. "Is that good or bad?" "Both," Marcus said. "It's both." Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then, Mom would have said something smart right now. Marcus almost laughed. She would have. She absolutely would have. What do you think she would have said? Marcus thought about it. Janet had been a woman of very few wasted words. She'd had this quality rare in Marcus's experience of reducing complicated situations to their essential truth without losing any of the complication. She'd have looked at this whole thing, at the case, and the 21 people in the church room, and the federal filing, and the national news story, and she'd have found the sentence that named exactly what it was. "I think," Marcus said slowly. She would have said that the truth doesn't need a big audience to be true, but sometimes it needs one to be heard. Ethan considered this. "That's pretty smart." "She was pretty smart," Marcus said. The boy went back to his homework. Marcus went back to the kitchen, back to the dishes, back to the ordinary motion of an ordinary evening in a house where something extraordinary was quietly building. The DA's decision came on a Friday. Reeves called Marcus at 3 in the afternoon. She didn't lead with it. She asked how he was. Asked about Ethan, went through a brief update on the federal timeline. And Marcus, who had learned to read the pauses in her speech, said, "Catherine, just tell me." She was quiet for exactly 1 second. "The DA has filed criminal charges against Deputy Dale Bradock," she said. "Corruption, civil rights violations under state statute, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority. He surrendered this morning. He's in custody pending arraignment." Marcus stood in the middle of his kitchen. He had imagined this moment in various forms many times since the night in the parking lot under the gas station lights. He'd imagined feeling triumphant, or relieved, or vindicated in the specific burning way of someone who has been wronged and then made right. He'd imagined it feeling large and conclusive. Instead, what he felt was quieter than that. Something more like the feeling at the end of a very long day of difficult work, when you sit down for the first time and become aware of how much of yourself you've been carrying. "Okay," he said. "I know," Reeves said. "The victims," Marcus said. "Can I tell them?" "I'll send an official communication to everyone in the group, but yes, if you want to call people personally, that's your call to make." "I'll call Cheryl first," Marcus said. "That makes sense," Reeves said, and he could hear something in her voice, not quite emotion, but adjacent to it. The sound of someone who does hard work for important reasons, and occasionally unexpectedly sees that work reach a moment of clarity. He called Cheryl Simmons. She picked up on the third ring, slightly breathless, like she'd been moving through the house. "Cheryl," Marcus said. "It's Marcus Williams." "Marcus." Her voice changed. He heard her stop moving. "Tell me." "He's been charged," Marcus said. "Criminal charges. He's in custody." Silence. Then very quietly the sound of Cheryl Simmons, exhaling a long, slow breath, the kind that carries with it something that has been held for a very long time. "6 years," she said. "I know," Marcus said. "I want you to know something," Cheryl said. Her voice was steady but full, the way a voice gets when it's working hard to contain something. "What you did, what you chose to do that night on that road, do you understand what that gave people like me? Do you understand what it meant to have someone say with evidence, with proof, this happened, this is real, this is not in your head?" Marcus didn't say anything. He was standing by the kitchen window, and outside Ethan was in the backyard tossing a ball against the fence by himself, catching it, tossing it again, absorbed in the simple repetition of it. "I was never going to stop believing what happened to me," Cheryl said. "I knew what that man did. But there's a difference between knowing something and being able to make the world see it. You made the world see it. You came to that meeting," Marcus said. "All 21 of you came. That's what made this big enough to matter." "We came because of you," Cheryl said. Marcus watched his son throw the ball again. "Catch it." "Ms. Simmons," he said. My son has a birthday coming up. I still owe him a baseball glove. Cheryl laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her full and warm. Well, she said, you better go get that boy his glove. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said. I intend to. He hung up. He stood for another moment by the window watching Ethan. The boy had started doing this thing with the ball, where he was clearly making up some kind of game involving the fence slats. Marcus couldn't follow the rules from inside, but Ethan seemed very clear on them, adjusting his position and his throw with the focused seriousness of a 10-year-old who has invented something and intends to master it. Marcus knocked on the glass. Ethan looked up. Marcus held up both hands, palm out. Come in. The boy rolled his eyes, the specific eye roll of a child interrupted at something important, but he tucked the ball under his arm and came inside. What? Ethan said. We need to go to the sporting goods store, Marcus said. Ethan stared at him. Right now. Right now. The boy stared for another moment. Then something crossed his face, understanding followed immediately by a careful blankness. The way kids go carefully blank when they don't want to show how much they feel something. The glove, he said. Yeah, Marcus said. Ethan nodded slowly. He was trying very hard to be cool about it. He was not entirely succeeding. Okay, he said. Let me get my shoes. The sporting goods store was 20 minutes from their house, and Ethan talked the entire way. Not about the glove, not directly. He talked about the Little League season, about a kid on the opposing team named Darius, who had an arm that Ethan described as genuinely unfair, about whether a pitcher could legally distract a batter by making faces about a documentary he'd seen at school about the Negro Leagues that he'd been thinking about ever since. He talked the way he always talked on car rides, continuously, circuitously, following one thought into the next. The way you follow a trail through woods, never quite sure where you're going, but confident the path is leading somewhere. Marcus drove and listened, and said the right things at the right moments, and underneath all of it, he was holding something very carefully, the way you hold something fragile when you're not sure it's as solid as it looks. Bradock was in custody. The charges were filed. The machinery of justice, slow and imperfect and long overdue, had finally actually moved, and Marcus was driving his son to buy a baseball glove on a Friday afternoon. He kept waiting to feel the thing he thought he was supposed to feel. The release. The exhale. The clean, complete sense of something finished. It hadn't come yet. Dad, Ethan said. Yeah. Is it over? Marcus glanced at him. The boy was looking out the side window, and his voice had dropped from the road trip register into the other register, the quieter one. The one that meant the real question was underneath this one. The criminal case is just starting, Marcus said. There's still the trial, and the civil case, the lawsuit, that's ongoing too. But he's arrested, Ethan said. Yes. And he's off the road. Yes. Ethan was quiet for a moment, still looking out the window. So the main thing happened. Marcus thought about how to answer that. He thought about Reeves explaining the federal filing. He thought about Birch and his careful emails. He thought about the 21 people in the church room, about Cheryl's laugh on the phone, about Raymond Fuller saying, "Let's go," with the simplicity of a man who has been waiting a long time to say it. The first main thing happened, Marcus said. Ethan absorbed this. What's the next main thing? Making sure it counts for something beyond just him. The boy nodded slowly. The policy stuff Ms. Reeves talked about. Marcus looked at him. You know about the policy stuff. I heard you on the phone, Ethan said with the unapologetic directness of a 10-year-old who does not consider listening through walls to be any kind of moral failing. She was talking about body cameras and independent review. I looked up what independent review means. And it means people outside the department check what the people inside the department do, Ethan said, so they can't cover for each other. That's roughly right, Marcus said. That seems like it should have been how it worked from the beginning, Ethan said. Yes, Marcus said. It does. They rode in silence for a moment. Then Ethan said more quietly, Did it feel scary when you were on the road that night and you told him you weren't consenting to the search? Marcus kept his eyes on the road. Yeah, he said. It did. But you said it anyway. I said it anyway. Why? Marcus was quiet for a moment, feeling for the honest answer, rather than the good one. Because I knew the camera was there, he said. And because of that, I knew that whatever happened there would be a record. And if there was a record, then I wasn't alone. Even on an empty road in the dark, I wasn't alone. He paused. That mattered. Ethan looked at him. The camera made you braver. The camera made it possible to be brave in a way that would mean something, Marcus said. There's a difference. The boy thought about this for a while. They pulled into the parking lot of the sporting goods store, and Marcus turned off the engine, and for a moment they just sat there. I think Mom would have liked how you handled it, Ethan said. Marcus pressed his lips together, looked straight ahead. Yeah, she always said you were too careful, Ethan said. She said you needed to be more confrontational sometimes. He paused. I think this counted. Marcus turned to look at his son. Ethan was already opening the car door, matter of fact, moving on done, with the heavy moment. The way kids are sometimes graciously done with heavy moments, right when you need them to be. Let's go get this glove, Ethan said. I've been thinking about the Rawlings Pro Preferred. I did research. You did research, Marcus said. I'm a serious person, Dad. You absolutely are, Marcus said, and got out of the car. The arraignment was covered by 3 local television stations and picked up by 2 national ones. Marcus watched it on the news at home alone. Ethan was at a friend's house, sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, going cold on the table in front of him. The footage showed Bradock in civilian clothes, walking into the courthouse flanked by his attorney. He looked smaller than Marcus remembered. That was the thing about seeing a person outside the context in which they had power over you, they contracted. The uniform, the badge, the flashlight, the authority, the road. All of it had been part of a costume, and without the costume, what remained was just a man, gray-haired heavyset moving through a courthouse corridor with his chin down. The charges were read by the news anchor over footage. Corruption, civil rights violations, under state statute evidence tampering abuse of authority. The anchor described the case briefly, the pattern of stops, the complaints, the federal civil suit, the dashcam footage. She didn't describe Marcus by name. By agreement with Reeves, his identity had been kept out of media coverage to that point. But she said in describing the evidence that a private citizen's dashcam recording had provided clear documentation of the alleged behavior. A private citizen's dashcam recording. Marcus looked at the television for a moment after she moved on to the next story. He thought about the electronics store, the 22-year-old clerk, just in case. He thought about the 63 complaints, about how many of those people had gotten into their cars and driven home in the dark, carrying the specific loneliness of someone who knows exactly what happened to them and can't make anyone else see it clearly enough to act. He turned off the television. He rinsed his coffee cup. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in months. The civil case moved into its next phase in the weeks after the arraignment. The county, now clearly aware that the trajectory of the situation had shifted decisively against them, entered into serious settlement negotiations. Birch and Reeves spoke twice a week. The conversations as Reeves relayed them to Marcus had changed in tone. The county's initial position had been defensive, probing, looking for weaknesses. Now it was functional, practical, focused on terms. The county wanted resolution. They wanted it before the federal case went to trial, before the discovery process forced the release of more internal documents, before the story got larger and harder to manage. Reeves wanted everything on her list. The negotiations were detailed, and sometimes contentious, and sometimes moved backward before moving forward the way negotiations do. Marcus was not in those conversations. That was Reeves's arena, and he'd long since learned to trust her in it. But she kept him informed, and there were several moments when he was glad she had told him not to expect a straight line. The first breakpoint came over the restitution amounts. The county proposed a flat figure to be distributed across all documented victims. Reeves rejected it. The restitution, she argued, had to be individualized. Each victim assessed separately, based on the amount, seized the interest that would have accrued, and a damages multiplier that reflected the civil rights violation. Birch pushed back. Reeves did not move. The argument went 3 rounds over 2 weeks before the county conceded the principle and began working through the individual calculations. The second breakpoint was the policy reform package. The county's initial proposal on reforms was, as Reeves described it to Marcus, cosmetic: a revised training module, a memo about forfeiture procedure, a vague commitment to review the complaint process. "That's not what we're asking for," Marcus said. "It's not," Reeves confirmed. "I told them the same thing, in more legal language but the same substance. What they were asking for, what the 23 victims had agreed on in the church room, was structural. Mandatory body cameras for all deputies on patrol, with footage retained and reviewed independently. Forfeiture cases above a certain dollar threshold, requiring review by an external oversight body before proceeds could be retained. A formal independent review board for complaints against deputies, replacing the internal review process that had absorbed 63 complaints in 10 years without producing a single disciplinary action. The county said this was beyond the scope of a civil settlement. Reeves said she understood their position and would see them in federal court. The county came back with a revised proposal 2 weeks later. This one was not cosmetic. While the civil negotiations ground forward, the criminal case was building its own momentum. Marcus had limited visibility into the criminal prosecution. That was the DA's case, not his, but Reeves had contacts and Deshawn had contacts, and what they heard through both channels was consistent. The prosecution was solid. The IA investigation had produced a detailed report that documented the pattern across Bradock's decade on Route 9. Financial investigators had traced cash flows that, while not conclusively proving where the seized money had gone, raised questions that Bradock's defense team would have significant difficulty answering. Several witnesses from the victim group had agreed to testify. And then there was the footage. The dashcam footage had been certified authenticated and entered into the prosecution's evidence file. Marcus had sat with a court official and Reeves for 2 hours going through the chain of custody documentation, the upload timestamp from the night of the stop, the cloud backup record, the device authentication. The footage was legally and technically unimpeachable. Bradock's attorney had tried twice to have it excluded. Both attempts had failed. Marcus knew this because Reeves told him, and because he allowed himself on 2 occasions to look at news coverage more carefully than he usually did. Knowing it was there, knowing the motion had failed, feeling something that was not quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it. Not the burning vindication he might have expected months ago, something more durable than that, something like the feeling of a foundation. The assistant DA on the criminal case. A woman named Irene Vasquez had called Marcus once briefly to inform him of his role as a potential witness and to ask 3 procedural questions. She was efficient and precise and said very little beyond what was necessary, which Marcus respected. Before she hung up, she said, "Mr. Williams, the footage you provided is central to this case. I want you to know that." "I understand," Marcus said. "I mean specifically," Vasquez said. "Without it, we have a pattern case, significant but arguable. With it, we have a demonstration. There's no interpretation required. It shows exactly what happened in sequence in the defendant's own words and actions." "Good," Marcus said. "I'll be in touch about trial scheduling," she said, and hung up. Marcus put his phone down and thought about Bradock counting those bills slowly, deliberately, making sure Marcus watched each one. "I thought about a lot of things." The national attention brought things Marcus had not fully anticipated. He'd expected the press interest. Reeves had warned him, and he'd prepared, or thought he had. What he hadn't fully anticipated was the volume and nature of the private messages. Letters, emails that Reeves's office began forwarding to him in batches after the national story ran. Messages through the community advocacy network that Deshawn ran. They came from people. Marcus didn't know in places he'd never been. A man in Mississippi describing a stop on a rural highway in 2019. $300 taken, complaint filed and dismissed. A woman in Ohio who'd had the same thing happen to her father, who was elderly and didn't understand civil forfeiture, who'd spent 2 years believing he'd somehow misremembered his own experience. a retired veteran in Georgia who'd read about the case and written 3 careful pages describing what had happened to him on a highway outside of Savannah, and whether Marcus thought he still had any recourse. Marcus couldn't respond to all of them. There were too many, and Reeves cautioned him against anything that could be construed as legal advice or public commentary on ongoing proceedings. But he read them. Every one of them that came to him directly, he read. He sat one evening at the kitchen table and read for 2 hours, and what built in him over those 2 hours was not what he might have expected. It wasn't anger. He'd moved through anger in the early weeks and come out the other side of it. It wasn't righteousness. It was something more like grief, actually. A sorrow that was specific and enormous at the same time. Because each of these messages was a person describing the same experience, not the same road, not the same deputy, but the same fundamental transaction. An authority figure with a badge and a system behind him, and an individual person on the side of a road, with nothing but their own account of what had happened to them, and the gap between those two things that the system was designed to make unbridgeable. His camera had bridged that gap once. One time, one road, one deputy. He thought about how many stretches of road he hadn't been on. He closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Then he heard Ethan moving around upstairs. The particular thumping and shuffling sound of a 10-year-old ostensibly getting ready for bed. And he got up, went upstairs, stood in the doorway of his son's room, where the boy was very unconvincingly pretending he hadn't been doing something other than getting ready for bed. "What were you doing?" Marcus said. "Reading," Ethan said. "What were you reading?" A pause. "About civil asset forfeiture." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "Why?" "Because it's your case," Ethan said. "I want to understand it." Marcus looked at his son, who was sitting on the edge of his bed with his tablet in his lap, and the old stuffed dog pushed slightly behind a pillow, as though it had spontaneously relocated there on its own. A 10-year-old teaching himself constitutional law at 9:30 at night because it was his father's case. "What have you learned?" Marcus said. "That it started as a way to take money from drug cartels," Ethan said. "But the way it works now, you don't have to be charged with a crime. They can take your stuff and put the burden on you to prove it isn't connected to crime. So you're basically guilty until proven innocent, but for your property instead of you personally." He paused. "That seems backwards." "It is backwards," Marcus said. "Why did people let it get like that?" Marcus thought about how to answer. "Because the people it mostly happened to," he said, "didn't have enough power to stop it. And the people with enough power to stop it weren't the ones it was mostly happening to." Ethan thought about this. "Until you." "I'm not powerful," Marcus said. "You had a camera," Ethan said. "And you weren't scared enough to not use it." Marcus stood in the doorway of his son's room and felt the specific weight of being known by someone who has no agenda in their knowing, who is simply watching you clearly and telling you what they see. "Get some sleep," Marcus said. "I'm not tired," Ethan said. "I know you're not tired. Get some sleep anyway." "Dad?" "Yeah." "I'm proud of you," Ethan said, matter-of-factly. The way he said most important things, as though they were simply true and didn't require presentation. Marcus nodded. "I know," he said. "Go to sleep." He turned off the light and went back downstairs and sat with all of it for a while. The settlement agreement was reached on a Tuesday morning in late October, approximately 5 months after Marcus had stood on the shoulder of Route 9 and watched Dale Bradock count $500 into his own pocket. Reeves called him before the ink was technically dry. "We got it," she said. And her voice, usually so measured so deliberately without excess, had something in it that Marcus hadn't heard before. "All of it," he said. "Full individual restitution for all 23 documented victims, calculated at the individualized rate we proposed. Mandatory body cameras for all patrol deputies implemented within 90 days. Independent external review board for forfeiture cases, modeled on the proposal our team drafted. Independent oversight of the complaint process with a standing civilian review panel. Annual public reporting on traffic stop demographics." A pause. and Bradock's termination from the department effective immediately separate from and in addition to any criminal outcomes. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table. He had a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked at it. "The oversight board," he said. "Is it binding, not advisory?" "Binding," Reeves said. "It has actual authority to compel case reviews and refer findings to the county council." I pushed hard on that specifically. An advisory board is a conversation. A binding board is accountability. "Okay," Marcus said. "Marcus." Her voice settled into something more personal, something she allowed herself rarely. "I want you to understand what happened here. 23 people got their money back. One man who spent a decade preying on people in that county is off the road and facing criminal prosecution. And the structural conditions that allowed him to operate are being dismantled, not perfectly, not completely. Nothing is ever complete, but meaningfully, substantially." She paused. "That is not a small outcome." "No," Marcus said. "It's not. How are you feeling?" He thought about it honestly. "Like the beginning of something is finished," he said. "Not the whole thing, but the first part." "That's exactly what it is," Reeves said, after he hung up. Marcus sat for a long time at the kitchen table. He looked around the kitchen, the Little League schedule still on the fridge, Ethan's homework from yesterday still on the counter, the drawer where Janet's legal pad lived, the ordinary furniture of an ordinary life. He got up, went to the drawer, and took out the legal pad. He flipped to the page where he'd written everything down the night after meeting with Reeves the first time. His notes from that night, the facts and the feelings, the timeline. He read through it. He stopped at the bottom of the page at the line he'd written last. 63 people didn't have a camera. I did. He uncapped the pen. Below that line he wrote one more thing. 23 of them came forward anyway. That matters more. He capped the pen. He put the pad back in the drawer. Then he called his mother. She picked up on the first ring the way mothers do when they have been quietly keeping a phone nearby for months, waiting for a specific call without admitting that's what they've been doing. "It's done," Marcus said. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me," he told her. "All of it. The restitution, the cameras, the oversight board, the termination." He heard her breathing on the other end of the line, and at several points he heard her inhale in a specific way that meant she was holding something in. When he finished, she said, "Your father would have been proud of you." Marcus pressed his lips together. "Yeah. He didn't live to see a lot of things get better," his mother said. "He believed they would. He used to say, you remember this, he used to say that the thing about progress is it moves slow enough that the people who start pushing it don't always get to see it move." "I remember," Marcus said. "He would have wanted to see this one," she said. Marcus stared at the kitchen wall. "I know," he said. "I know he would have." The press conference was held 2 days later on the steps of the county courthouse. Reeves spoke first, outlining the settlement terms in precise, clear language. Park spoke briefly about the federal case being resolved. The county's official spokesperson read a statement acknowledging the department's failures to act on prior complaints and committing to the reform measures language that had been negotiated word by word and which Reeves had made sure contained no passive constructions that would allow the county to walk it back later. Marcus stood to the side during these portions next to Deshawn, who had the expression of a man at a funeral who is keeping himself professionally composed but feeling a great deal underneath. "You doing okay?" Deshawn said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus said. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to. Reeves said it's your call." "I know," Marcus said. "So." Marcus looked at the small crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. Reporters, a camera crew, about a dozen people from the victim group, a few community members who'd come from the church on 4th Street, Preston, standing in the back in his good coat. He looked at Cheryl Simmons, who was standing near the front, very upright, with her hands folded in front of her, and a look on her face that Marcus had no single word for. Not triumph, not relief. Something more complex and more earned than either. "I'll speak," Marcus said. When Reeves introduced him and he stepped to the small cluster of microphones, Marcus didn't have notes. He hadn't prepared remarks. He'd thought about it and decided that if he prepared remarks, he would say the right things in the right order, and it would be correct, and it would be empty. He looked at the cameras for a moment. "I'm not an activist," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm a warehouse worker. I'm a little league coach. I'm a father." He paused. "About 5 months ago, I was driving home from my mother's house when a deputy sheriff pulled me over for no legal reason, searched my car without my consent, and took $500 out of my glove compartment. Money I'd saved to buy my son a birthday gift." He let that sit for a second. "I had a dash cam running," he said. "That's the reason any of this happened. Not because I was brave or strategic, or because I had a plan. Because 3 months before that night, I listened to a friend describe his own experience on the same road, and I drove to an electronics store and spent $80 on a camera. That's the whole story of how this started." He looked out at the group. "But here's what I need to say. I filed a complaint. I had a camera, and I filed a complaint, and the system still almost absorbed it the way it absorbed 63 complaints before mine. What made the difference wasn't my footage alone. It was 23 people who had the courage to come forward without footage, who had to stand up and say this happened to me knowing the only evidence they had was their own word, and do it anyway." He paused. "That's harder than what I did, a lot harder. And they did it because they believed that this time it might mean something." He looked at Cheryl. "To every person who filed a complaint and got nothing," he said, "I want you to know that your complaint is part of this. The 63 complaints that went nowhere, they created a record. They created a history that an investigator could find, and a lawyer could use, and a federal court could weigh. They didn't disappear. They accumulated. And eventually, along with one camera and 23 people willing to stand up, they became enough." He stepped back from the microphones. The small crowd was quiet for a moment. Then Preston started clapping, and then Cheryl, and then the rest of them, and Marcus stood there and let it happen, and tried not to feel undone by it. Afterward, standing on the sidewalk, while reporters approached Reeves and Park with questions, Deshawn came up beside Marcus and stood there without saying anything for a moment. Then, "You know what your problem is?" "I have a lot of problems," Marcus said. "You keep calling yourself not an activist," Deshawn said. "I'm not." "Marcus." Deshawn turned to look at him. "What do you think activism is?" Marcus looked at him. "It's not a title," Deshawn said. "It's not a job description. It's not something you sign up for. It's what happens when an ordinary person refuses to let an injustice be the end of the sentence." He paused. "You refused. That's all it ever is." Marcus looked away. Down the sidewalk, past the courthouse steps at the street beyond, cars moving, people walking. The ordinary texture of an ordinary Tuesday in a city that was very slightly different today than it had been yesterday. "My son told me last night that he wants to be a lawyer," Marcus said. Deshawn blinked. "Since when?" "Since reading about civil asset forfeiture at 9:30 at night without my knowledge," Marcus said. Deshawn laughed, a full, genuine laugh, the kind that doesn't have any performance in it. "That kid," he said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "He's going to be something." "He already is," Marcus said. The weeks after the settlement had their own particular texture. The civil case was resolved. The criminal case was proceeding toward trial. Bradock had entered a not guilty plea, and his attorney had issued a statement describing his client as a dedicated law enforcement professional, whose record was being mischaracterized, a statement that Reeves read aloud to Marcus over the phone, in a tone that managed to convey both amusement and contempt simultaneously. The reform measures had begun to be implemented. The body camera rollout was on the 90-day timeline as agreed, and Reeves had a monitoring provision built into the settlement that required the county to report progress monthly to an independent auditor. The Civilian Oversight Board was in the process of being constituted. Reeves had recommended 3 names from the advocacy community for the panel, and 2 had been accepted. Deshawn had been asked to serve on the inaugural board, which he had accepted with the kind of focused satisfaction of a man who has been pushing on a door for 9 years and has finally felt it move. Marcus had been offered a position on the oversight board as well. He had thought about it for a week before saying no. Reeves had asked him why. Because I'm a warehouse worker and a little league coach, he said. And I think the board needs people who do this work full-time, not someone whose main expertise is having been a victim. Having lived experience of what you're trying to prevent, Reeves said, is expertise. Maybe, Marcus said. But Deshawn has lived experience and 9 years of advocacy work. I have lived experience and a dash cam. He paused. I'll do other things, but I'm not the right fit for the board. What other things? Reeves asked. He hadn't answered that question yet, but he'd been thinking about it. He'd been thinking about the $80 the dash cam had cost, about the electronics store, about the young woman who had helped him choose the model without knowing what it was for. He'd been thinking about the veteran in Georgia who had sent 3 pages describing his experience on the highway outside Savannah. About the woman in Ohio whose father had spent 2 years doubting his own memory. About the man in Mississippi who'd lost $300 in 2019 and filed a complaint that went nowhere. He'd been thinking about all the roads he hadn't been on. One conversation he'd had in the aftermath stayed with him specifically. A woman from the victim group named Angela Reeves, no relation to Catherine, who was 41 and worked as a nurse and had lost $700 3 years earlier. Angela had come to him after the press conference not to talk about the case, but to ask him a specific question. When you installed the camera, she said, did you know how to use it? Not really, Marcus said. I figured it out. Do you think most people know how to use one, or even know that they can? Marcus looked at her. What are you getting at? I'm getting at, Angela said carefully, that the camera is what made this possible, and that most people don't have a camera, and that an $80 dash cam is not accessible to everyone, and that even if it were accessible, people don't know their rights clearly enough to know what to say on camera when it matters. She held his gaze. I think someone should be teaching people, she said. Community workshops. Know your rights. How to document a stop. What to say and not say. How to file a complaint that doesn't get absorbed. Where to go when the first complaint goes nowhere. She paused. I can do the medical part, what to do if you're injured during a stop, but I don't know the rest. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Deshawn runs the accountability project, he said. I know, Angela said. I've already talked to him. He said he'd do it if someone coordinated it. She paused again. He suggested I talk to you. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'm a warehouse worker, he said. I know, Angela said. And you're the only reason 23 people got their money back and a corrupt cop is facing criminal charges. She tilted her head slightly. I'm a nurse. I still help people when they're hurt. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he almost smiled. Send me Deshawn's availability, he said. We'll set up a meeting. Angela nodded, satisfied in the quiet way of someone who had already known how this conversation was going to end before it began. He told Ethan about it that night at dinner. Not all of it, just the basic idea. Community workshops, teaching people their rights, how to document a stop, working with Deshawn and Angela and whoever else came on board. Ethan listened, eating steadily in the way he ate when he was thinking about something more than food. When Marcus finished, the boy said, So you're not done? No, Marcus said. Is that good? Marcus thought about it honestly. I think so, he said. The settlement closed one thing. The criminal trial will close another. But the actual problem, the reason this could happen to me, to all those people, that's not fixed by one settlement in one county. It's bigger, Ethan said. Much bigger. Ethan put his fork down and looked at his father. Are you scared of how big it is? Marcus met his son's eyes. The boy was 10 years old and asking him whether he was afraid of the scale of the work ahead of him, with the directness of someone who has decided that pretending adults aren't afraid of things is a waste of everyone's time. Yeah, Marcus said. A little. But you're going to do it anyway. Yeah, Marcus said. I am. Ethan picked his fork back up. Okay, he said, and went back to his dinner. And Marcus sat across from his son in the kitchen of their house, the kitchen with Janet's legal pad in the drawer, and the Little League schedule on the fridge, and the light on over the stove that Ethan had started leaving on the night his mother died and had never stopped and felt for the first time since the night on Route 9. Something that was neither grief nor anger, nor the determined forward motion he'd been running on for 5 months. Something that felt quietly and carefully like peace. Not the peace of something finished. The peace of something understood. He knew what he was doing and why. He knew who he was doing it for. He knew it was going to be hard and long and sometimes discouraging, and that there would be days when the scale of it pressed down on him in a way that made a lonely stretch of highway feel simple by comparison. He knew all of that, and he was going to do it anyway, because something was more important than the difficulty of it. Because his son was watching. Because 63 people hadn't had a camera. Because the woman in Ohio's father had spent 2 years doubting his own memory, and that should never happen to anyone. And if Marcus could do one thing to make it less likely he was going to do that thing. He looked at Ethan. "You want seconds?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "And then I have homework." "I know you have homework," Marcus said. "I signed the assignment sheet this morning." "It's a lot of homework." "I know. English and math." "That's 2 subjects," Marcus said. "That's not a lot." "Dad." "Eat your food, Marcus said. Ethan ate his food. Marcus got up to get him seconds. The kitchen was warm and the light was on over the stove, and outside the October dark had settled over the neighborhood quietly, the way it does in that season, completely without drama. One day, you look up and the light is gone, and the dark is ordinary, and you understand it's just the season changing, just the world turning, just time moving forward, the way it always does, indifferent to everything except its own motion. Marcus stood at the stove and served his son's plate. And somewhere to the east on a 3-mile stretch of Route 9 that a deputy named Dale Bradock would never drive again. Cars passed in the dark, one after another, their headlights cutting briefly through the nothing and then moving on. The trial of Dale Bradock began on a Monday morning in February, 7 months after Marcus had stood on the shoulder of Route 9 with his hands on the steering wheel and his heart beating hard against his ribs. Marcus sat in the second row of the gallery between Deshawn and Angela. Cheryl Simmons was 3 seats to his left. Raymond Fuller was directly behind him. Around them, spread through the gallery, in the particular quiet of people who have been waiting a long time for a room to acknowledge what they already know, were 14 of the 23. They had all come. Not because they were required to. Most of them weren't scheduled to testify until later in the week. They had come because this was the day the proceeding formally began, and they had decided without anyone explicitly organizing it that they would be present for the beginning of it. Marcus had noticed them arriving one by one before the session opened. Preston in his good coat. The young guy from the barber shop, whose name Marcus now knew, was Damien, who had come in with his uncle, the man who'd lost $800 and never filed a complaint, who had driven 3 hours to be in this room. Angela, precise and composed. Cheryl, upright, hands folded, with that expression Marcus still hadn't found a single word for. He had looked at each of them, and they had looked back at him, and no one had said anything significant because nothing significant needed to be said. They were here. That was the statement. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. Bradock was escorted in and seated beside his attorney, and Marcus looked at him the way he'd looked at him in the news footage of the arraignment, with the particular clarity of seeing someone outside the context of their power, stripped of the uniform and the badge and the empty road and the flashlight and all the architecture of authority that had made that night on Route 9 feel so absolute. He was just a man. He had always been just a man. The difference was that now the room knew it. Irene Vasquez opened for the prosecution with the economy of someone who knows her case is strong and doesn't need to dress it up. "The evidence in this case," she said, standing before the jury with her hands at her sides, "is not complicated. It is not ambiguous. It does not require you to weigh one account against another or decide who to believe when memories conflict. What you will see is a video recording of the defendant in uniform on duty conducting an illegal search of a private citizen's vehicle and seizing $500 in cash with no legal basis. You will hear that recording's audio, in which the defendant falsely claims probable cause, refuses to give a lawful reason for the traffic stop, and issues a veiled threat designed to discourage the victim from filing a complaint. She paused. And then you will hear from 14 people who experienced the same thing without a camera to document it. 14 people who have waited years for a room like this one. She sat down. Bradock's attorney stood up and delivered his opening argument, which was careful and professional, and rested on 3 pillars. The dashcam footage was subject to contextual misinterpretation. The statistical data was correlation rather than causation, and his client had served the department with distinction for over a decade. He said the word distinguished 4 times. Marcus listened to all of it with his hands resting on his knees. I thought about what Vasquez had said. 14 people who have waited years for a room like this one. He thought about the 63 complaints. He thought about Donna Keller's spreadsheet sitting in Birch's filing cabinet growing like a water stain on a ceiling, the liability expanding month by month, while the system absorbed complaint after complaint and returned them empty. He thought about how close this had all come to being nothing. 1 camera. $80. A clerk at an electronics store who'd asked, "What do you need it for?" and accepted just in case, as a complete sentence. Marcus took the stand on the second day. He had prepared with Vasquez for 2 sessions, and with Reeves for 1 more. He had practiced answering questions about the night in the flat. Precise language that kept the facts foregrounded without editorializing. Vasquez had been clear about this. The jury will editorialize for themselves, she'd said. Your job is to be unimpeachable, steady, clear, completely factual. He was steady. He was clear. Vasquez walked him through the night in chronological order. The drive, the lights, the window, the exchange, the search, the envelope, the money, the threat. With each question, Marcus answered in the same register, calm, direct, exact. He did not look at Bradock during this portion. He focused on Vasquez's face, and then on the jury, when he needed to make sure they were following. When the dashcam footage was played for the jury, the full recording start to finish in the courtroom with the sound up. Marcus watched the jury watch it. He watched their faces as they heard Bradock claim a marijuana odor that didn't exist. He watched them as the search unfolded on the screen as the glove compartment opened and the envelope appeared. He watched them as Bradock counted the bills. 2 jurors in the front row looked at Marcus while the money was being counted. Not at the screen, at him. As though they needed to see his face while the footage played to make the connection between the image and the person complete. He held their gaze steadily. Then Bradock's attorney stood up for cross-examination, and he did what defense attorneys do. He pressed on the small things, the soft edges, looking for any inconsistency that might give the jury permission to doubt. He asked Marcus whether he had installed the camera specifically because he had intended to encounter Bradock. Marcus said no. He asked whether Marcus had been driving the speed limit. Marcus said yes. He asked whether Marcus had been cooperative during the stop. Marcus looked at him for a moment. I complied with every lawful instruction, Marcus said. I placed both hands on the steering wheel before the officer approached the vehicle. I announced every movement I was going to make before making it. I provided my license and registration. I stated clearly that I did not consent to a search and asked for the legal basis of the stop. I was given no valid legal basis. He paused. So yes, I was cooperative. The attorney moved on. When Vasquez stood up for redirect, she asked one question. Mr. Williams, she said, when Deputy Bradock took the money from your vehicle, what did he say it was for? He said he was holding it pending investigation, Marcus said, under civil asset forfeiture. And when you told him it was your son's birthday money? He told me I could file for its return, Marcus said. He said the process took 90 days. Vasquez looked at the jury. No further questions. Cheryl Simmons testified on the 3rd day. Marcus was in the gallery when she took the stand, and he watched her, the way he'd watched her in the church room, the straight back, the folded hands, the expression that existed somewhere between dignity and grief and something harder to name. Vasquez asked her to describe the stop on Route 9 3 years earlier, and Cheryl did clearly, specifically, without hesitation. $400. Money she was bringing to her sister for a medical bill. The same false odor claim. The same search. The same seized cash. the same receipt for property she never got back. Then Vasquez asked, "Ms. Simmons, after the stop, did you file a complaint?" "No," Cheryl said. "Can you explain why not?" Cheryl was quiet for a moment. The courtroom was very still. "I felt ashamed," she said. "I know that sounds strange. I hadn't done anything wrong. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. But when you are in that situation when someone with authority tells you that what you have is suspicious, that where you're going is suspicious, that who you are is suspicious, something happens inside you. You start second-guessing yourself. You start wondering if there's something you should have done differently, even when you know there wasn't." She paused. "And I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't have a camera. I only had my word. And I had learned enough in my 73 years to know that my word against a deputy's word was not going to be enough." The room was completely silent. "So I drove home," Cheryl said. "And I told myself to let it go. And I spent 6 years letting it go." She looked at the jury. "Then a young man with a dash cam filed a complaint, and I found out I wasn't the only one, and I understood that I was never supposed to feel ashamed. He was." She looked directly at Bradock when she said the last sentence. Bradock's attorney declined to cross-examine. The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days. Marcus spent most of that time at home. Reeves had advised him that waiting in or near the courthouse would only make the hours harder. He went to work. He made dinner. He drove Ethan to a practice and stood behind the backstop watching his son throw warm-up pitches and tried not to look at his phone too often. Ethan knew the jury was deliberating. He didn't ask about it directly, but he stayed closer to Marcus than usual over those 2 days in the subtle way kids stay close when they sense that the thing their parent is carrying is particularly heavy. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while Marcus was in the break room at the warehouse. Reeves. He stepped out into the hallway and picked up. "Guilty," she said. "All counts." Marcus put his hand on the wall. "All of them," he said. "Corruption, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, abuse of authority." A brief pause. "All 4 counts. Unanimous verdict." Marcus stood in the hallway of the warehouse with his hand on the painted cinder-block wall and breathed slowly. Around him the building continued its ordinary noise. The machinery, the voices, the mechanical rhythm of a place that keeps moving regardless of what's happening in your chest. "Okay," he said. "Sentencing is in 8 weeks, Reeves said. "The DA will be seeking maximum guidelines." She paused again. "Marcus, it's done." "Yeah," he said. "It is." After he hung up, he stood there for another moment. Then he texted Deshawn 2 words, "Guilty." All. Deshawn's response came in less than 10 seconds. "Call me tonight. Tonight we celebrate." He texted Cheryl Simmons the same 2 words. Her response took a few minutes, and when it came, it was 3 words. "Thank God." Finally. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to work. He picked Ethan up from school that afternoon and told him in the car. Ethan listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him, and when Marcus finished, the boy was quiet for a long moment. "So he's going to prison," Ethan said. "That's what sentencing will determine," Marcus said. "But yes, that's where this is going." Ethan looked out the window. They were stopped at a red light, and outside, it was a gray February afternoon, the kind that presses down low and flat over everything. "Do you feel like it's enough?" Ethan said. Marcus considered the question honestly. "I feel like it's what the legal system was supposed to do," he said. "Which is not nothing. It used to be nothing. Now it's something." "But is it enough?" "No," Marcus said. "Not by itself. That's why we're doing the workshops." The first community workshop had been held the previous month, a Saturday morning in the church on 4th Street, organized by Marcus and Angela and Deshawn, attended by 47 people who came to learn about their rights during traffic stops, how to document interactions with police, how to file complaints that didn't disappear, and where to go for legal help when the first door closed. They had already scheduled a second one. A church in the next county had reached out and asked if they'd come there. 47 people, Ethan said. He'd heard about the workshop. 47 people who know things now that they didn't know before, Marcus said. And some of those people are going to tell other people. And some of those other people are going to come to the next one. The workshops are more important than the trial, Ethan said. Marcus looked at him. What makes you say that? Because the trial fixes what already happened, Ethan said. But the workshops try to keep the next thing from happening. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The light changed, and he pulled forward. You've been thinking about this a lot, he said. I told you, Ethan said. I want to be a lawyer. I know you did. I'm serious. I know you're serious, Marcus said. You're always serious. Ethan ignored this. I want to do what Ms. Reeves does, cases like this one. Civil rights law. Yeah. A pause. Is that okay? Marcus glanced at him. Is it okay that you want to dedicate your life to protecting people's rights? Yeah, that's okay. Mom would have had something to say about it, Ethan said. She would have told you to get the best grades in your class and not let anyone tell you what you couldn't do, Marcus said. Ethan smiled at the window. Small private. That does sound like her. It sounds exactly like her, Marcus said. On the first Saturday of March, Marcus drove Route 9, not because he had to. There was no errand that took him that way, no obligation, no reason connected to the case or the workshops or anything external. He drove it because he had been thinking about it for weeks, thinking about what it would feel like to drive that road without the weight of what had happened on it pressing down on every mile. He drove it alone in the early morning, when the road was quiet, with the heater running against the March cold, and the dashcam light glowing red in the corner of his vision. Still recording. Always recording now. He drove the full length of the stretch, where Bradock had worked 3 miles of nothing in particular, just asphalt and tree line, and the occasional turnout. The same road it had always been indifferent to everything that had happened on it. About 2 miles in he passed the spot. He knew at approximately the right shoulder, the place where he'd pulled over that night, where he'd sat with his hands at 10 and 2, and watched a large man in a uniform walk toward him in the side mirror. He didn't slow down as he passed it. He just looked at it for a second. An empty stretch of road on a Saturday morning. Nothing remarkable. Nothing left of what had happened there except what people carried in themselves. He kept driving. At the far end of the stretch, he pulled off at a gas station. Not the same one from that night, a different one. But still under the amber light that those stations all share, and he sat for a moment with the engine running. He thought about Janet. I thought about her the way he'd learned to think about her in the years since the hospital, not with the acute grief of the first year, which had felt like a physical injury. Something wrong with the air itself, but with the specific tenderness of someone who carries a person they loved in the daily fabric of their thinking. She was present in the way that people who shaped you remain present in the choices you make, in the things you find yourself saying in the moment. You catch yourself responding to a hard situation the way they would have responded, and understanding that they are still in some real sense in the room. I thought about what she would say about Route 9, about the case about Bradock and the verdict and the workshops and the Civilian Oversight Board and all the machinery that was now slowly, imperfectly, actually turning. She would probably say something concise and accurate that made everything feel both more manageable and more serious at the same time. She would probably ask if he was eating enough. She would definitely say that Ethan needed a haircut. Marcus smiled at the windshield. Then he pulled out of the gas station and headed home. He got back while Ethan was still asleep, which was not unusual for a Saturday. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad in front of him. Janet's legal pad, the yellow one with the grocery lists, fading on the early pages, and the notes from the case in the back. He read through it one more time. The timeline, the names, the 63 complaints, the line he'd added after the settlement. 23 of them came forward anyway. That matters more. He sat for a while. Then he turned to a fresh page. He wrote at the top, Workshop 2 Preparation Notes. And he started writing. He wrote about what had worked in the first workshop and what needed to be clearer. He wrote about the questions people had asked that the curriculum hadn't anticipated. He wrote about the woman who had raised her hand near the end and asked what you do when you're scared, when you're alone on the road and the camera is running, but your heart is pounding and your hands are not steady, and the person in front of you has a badge and you have nothing but your word and your rights. He had thought about that question for weeks. He wrote his answer now. Tell them the camera records when you can't. Your rights exist whether you're scared or not. Fear doesn't cancel your rights. The goal is not to be fearless. The goal is to act correctly even while afraid. Say what you need to say. Keep your hands visible. Stay in your body. And know before you get in the car that what you do in that moment may matter for someone who is not there yet. Someone who will drive that road after you. He stopped writing. Read it back. Then he added one line. You are never as alone on that road as it feels. He closed the pad. He put it back in the drawer. Janet's drawer still in her spot, and he stood up and went to the window. The March morning was pale and clear the light coming in at the low angle it keeps all winter. Outside the neighborhood was still quiet. A few cars on the street, someone's dog moving along the sidewalk with that determined early morning focus that dogs carry. He heard Ethan upstairs. The familiar sounds, the alarm, the shuffle, the thump of feet hitting the floor, the particular sequence of sounds that meant his son was moving through the morning. In 20 minutes, there would be cereal and a conversation that went somewhere unexpected, and homework that was due that Ethan had already completed, because Ethan always completed his homework, and just liked to mention it as though it were a surprise. Marcus stood at the window and watched the street. He thought about Bradock behind him now. The road ahead. The 47 people in the church room learning something they would carry forward. The veteran in Georgia. The woman in Ohio whose father had lost 2 years to doubt. The workshops spreading outward town by town. Church room by church room. The information moving through communities. The way necessary things move not fast, not dramatically, but persistently, finding its way into the spaces where it was needed. I thought about Ethan wanting to be a lawyer. He thought about Janet saying, "Promise me." He thought about what it means to promise something to someone who can no longer hold you to it, and how that turns out to be the most binding kind of promise of all, because the only person left to keep you accountable is yourself. And yourself is always present, always watching, always there in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, when you have to decide again what kind of man you are going to be today. He had kept the promise. He was going to keep keeping it. Not because it was easy. Not because the road ahead was clear, or the work was nearly done, or the system was fixed. It wasn't. One case, one verdict, one settlement, one oversight board in one county. These were not the end of anything except the specific beginning that had started on a Tuesday night when a man pulled onto the shoulder of Route 9 with his hands at 10 and 2. But beginnings matter. The first complaint matters. The first camera. The first person who decides that the road behind them is going to mean something to the road ahead. Ethan came downstairs at 7:15 barefoot, his hair standing up on one side, carrying his tablet, and the air of a person who has been awake for less than 10 minutes and has already formed several opinions about the day. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Marcus said. Ethan went to the cabinet and got a bowl and the cereal and sat down at the table with the focused efficiency of someone who does not wish to waste time on transition. He poured. He ate. He looked at the tablet. Then he looked up at his father. "You went out early," he said. It wasn't a question. He had heard the car. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Where?" Marcus looked at his son. "Route 9, he said. Ethan held his gaze for a moment. "How was it?" "Quiet," Marcus said. "Just a road." "Good," Ethan said, and went back to his cereal. Marcus sat down across from him and wrapped his hands around his coffee mug and looked at his son in the morning light. This 10-year-old boy with his mother's eyes and his grandmother's mouth and some quality, entirely his own. Sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning eating cereal and reading about civil rights law on a tablet he was technically not supposed to have at breakfast. Outside the morning was getting lighter. The neighborhood was waking up. The ordinary world was doing what it always does, moving forward, indifferent to nothing, and no one carrying everything and everyone with it, whether they were ready or not. Marcus had been on that road. He had kept his hands on the wheel. He had said the words that needed to be said, and he had not broken. And what had started as one man's stolen $500 on a dark and empty highway had become something that would outlast the night. It was born in something that lived now in courtroom records and policy documents, and the minds of 47 people who went home from a Saturday workshop knowing their rights, and in the hands of 23 people who had their money back, and in the Civilian Oversight Board, where Deshaun sat, and in the law school dreams of a 10-year-old eating cereal at a kitchen table on a March morning. A corrupt man had spent 10 years believing that the people he preyed on were too small, too alone, too afraid to fight back. He had been wrong about every single one of them. And a father who refused to let his son inherit the same injustice he had survived had proven it not with power, not with connections, not with anything except an $80 camera, the knowledge of his own rights, and the unshakable understanding that some things are more important than fear. That is how systems break. Not all at once. Not with a single dramatic blow. But with one person on one road on one night who decides that